When Russia carried out a missile strike against Ukraine's capital city last week, the damage was pretty frightening. Several floors of an apartment building were destroyed, at least 5 people were killed, several more injured. But amongst the wreckage, quite a frightening find. Debris that a team of Ukrainian forensic experts believe belongs to a Russian Zircon missile.
Russia has introduced a new missile system that could be impossible to defend against.
If Russia did fire a Zircon missile at Ukraine, I'll just say right now, it's not for sure. The evidence is disputed, which I'll explain in a bit. But if Russia did fire a Zircon missile into Ukraine, that would be a first for this entire war, because the Zircon is from a family of missiles that are considered virtually uninterceptable, impossible to shoot down. They're supposed to travel at many times the speed of sound. They fly relatively low, making them harder to see until it's too late, and with what can be a pretty unpredictable flight path. So what do we know? Now, before I say anything about what this missile is capable of, just keep in mind, it's not like you can just find a manual somewhere and read the specs. We've had to piece together what Russia's defense ministry says it can do and weigh that against what other governments and experts and analysts believe it can do. But let's just start with this. Hypersonic missiles, like the Zircon, go insanely fast.
Most commercial aircraft, jet aircraft, travel a little bit slower than the speed of sound. So if Zircon is moving 8 or 9 times the speed of sound, then it's moving more than 8 or 9 times faster than a commercial aircraft. Because you only have a short warning time, the so-called footprint of each interceptor, the distance that it can reach to shoot down an incoming missile is going to be relatively small. And so you're only going to be able to shoot down these very fast missiles if you happen to have an interceptor located in exactly the right place.
But there are a lot of unknowns. A lot depends on the actual speed in practice of the Zircon missile as opposed to what's actually claimed.
But speed also gives hypersonic missiles a different kind of advantage. If you've ever seen a rocket re-entry in a movie, you know that something moving at very high speed heats up the air around it. But traveling at hypersonic speed makes the air so hot, it's not even really air anymore, at least not in the way we're used to thinking about it.
After solid, liquid, and gas, plasma is the fourth state of matter. It is made of particles that have been ionized.
It turns into a completely separate state of matter called plasma, which is basically like a soup of atoms that get so excited they're knocking electrons off of each other. The best analogy for this that I've seen is if you imagine air like a bunch of water balloons floating around. Plasma is when those water balloons break. And with all of that electron mayhem, you get electrical interference that makes it really hard for radar to do its thing.
It turns the air around it into an electrical conductor, which means, of course, that it's undetectable to radar.
According to the US-based Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance, during flight, the missile is completely covered by a plasma cloud that absorbs any rays of radio frequencies and makes the missile invisible to radars. This allows the missile to remain undetected on its way to the target. But this class of hypersonic missile isn't just about speed. This is Russian Defense Ministry video. It's also about flight path. And because of the way it blazes through the sky, it may be able to confound missile defense systems in 2 other key ways. So this graphic from the conversation does a really good job showing the difference between a high-flying ballistic missile and a low-flying hypersonic missile. You see this big, wide arc through space. A rocket like that can also travel at hypersonic speeds, but it's a very long, very predictable path, easier to shoot down. The kind of hypersonic missiles that we're talking about are supposed to be able to stay very low, which in theory could introduce a new type of problem for defenders. Imagine the planet Earth. The geometry of being on a sphere really limits what something like ground radar would be able to detect when it looks up into the sky, because you can't really see around the curvature of the planet, right? So by the time a hypersonic missile finally arrives in your field of view, it's traveling so fast that it might be too late.
In the case of Zircon, it's going to be flying at 10, 20 kilometers, maybe higher. Radars are not going to pick it up very far in advance, and that's certainly going to complicate the task of interception.
Now, we could also talk about how, to some extent, these missiles can change course, too, making them harder to shoot down, and which also makes it harder to predict where they will land. But we have to be very careful, because, as I said before, we're dealing with an unknown. It's impossible for us to know exactly what the Russian Zircon can do. It is a very modern, somewhat secretive global arms race. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, France, India, Australia, Japan, they've all had research programs looking into hypersonic missile technology. According to the Congressional Budget Office in the United States, the Department of Defense has spent more than $8 billion since 2019 on programs to develop hypersonic missiles. Has made pretty grand claims about how its hypersonic arsenal will change warfare as we know it. About 5 years ago, Putin announced to the world Russia had two operational hypersonic weapons, the Kinzhal and the Avangard. Two different technologies, but both very fast.
It goes like a meteorite to its target, boasted Putin.
A few years later, we heard from Russia that it had completed testing of the Zircon missile, and that one of its warships in the Atlantic would, according to Russian state news, for the first time be armed with them, part of a new generation of unrivaled weapon systems.